Ken Trahan with Lenny Vangilder. It's our First NBC Bank Weekend Review, brought to you by First NBC Bank with 32 locations throughout the greater New Orleans area and beyond. That's First NBC Bank, proud sponsor of SportsNOLA.com. Starting backwards and then forwards, backwards, the Saints, the most recent team that played. And, of course, they had a workmanlike victory, 20-9 over Minnesota. Lenny, no turnovers, no touchdowns allowed, so that's progress. And I think workmanlike's the right word to use. It wasn't overly impressive, but it also wasn't depressing.
No, it was not just it was not the unbelievable performance that we've come to see at times, but it was also, you did the things that you need to do. And I think at the end of the day, while, the old expression that offense sells tickets and defense wins championships is really apparent with this team. And, obviously their offense can do a lot of things, but at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how much your offense does if your defense doesn't get the job done. The defense clearly played its best game of the year on Sunday, holding Minnesota out of the end zone, couple of red zone stops to force field goals. That was the difference in this game. And, the offense kind of set the tenor for that with touchdowns in their first two possessions, allowing the defense to play with a significant lead just about the entire afternoon. It was never less than 7 points.
And, of course, a bonehead play by Captain Munnerlyn, which really changed the game and prevented the Vikings from possibly coming back and winning that football game. Mike Zimmer, Sean Payton, they know each other very well, and you can see the adjustments. And then, of course, the other factor, field position. The Saints started every possession from their 20-yard line or worse. They had to drive the length of the field every time.
And, it's been that way for 3 games. I pointed out on Twitter last night, the Saints have had 28 possessions thus far in 3 games, and only 5 times have they started past the 20-yard line. I think you point to a couple of things there. One is defense has not gotten many 3-and-outs when they've had a chance to back somebody up and maybe get some field position, at least in the first couple of games. But most significantly is the fact that just kickers are so good now. You're not getting a chance to really try. You're not getting anywhere if you can run anything out. If you're trying to run something out, you're doing it from 7 and 8 yards deep in the end zone, and you're really taking a risk that you can pop maybe a 30-yard return to get to the 22 or 23-yard line at that point. So, that has been a challenge. But obviously, Drew Brees and company are more than up to the challenge of going 80 yards. But if you can shorten the field with a takeaway, and by the way, the only takeaway the Saints have had this year came deep in the Saints territory. They got the ball, down near the goal line. So, it's those are the types of things that you give yourself a short field, a lot like what we saw in 2009. Not just scoring defensively, but just giving the offense a short field which to work, and they haven't had that much all year.
No, they really haven't. And, of course, Dallas up next, a Sunday night affair. And Dallas, no good defensively, but good offensively. So this has the earmark of being a shootout Sunday night. Then Tampa Bay at home. So the Saints need this win. If they get it, they'll go 3-2 by the break.
That's very, very good point. And that they've, you really want to go into the break 3-2 at this point. Pittsburgh did the Saints a favor last night with a win over Carolina. The Saints just a game out suddenly in the NFC South, and no one has really separated themselves, as it were, in the NFL. I mean, Seattle has a loss. San Francisco has 2 losses. Green Bay has 2 losses. So other than, what Philadelphia and Arizona are sitting unbeaten at this point, no one has really, separated themselves to say, hey, you got to come catch us.
No doubt. Of course, turning to Saturday, LSU really a performance that was disappointing against a good team. We pointed out last week Mississippi State would be a tougher out than Wisconsin because of their offense, and that certainly proved to be the case. They shredded LSU's defense. And, Lenny, I think that kind of indicated we got a false positive on LSU's defense in the 2 previous games against badly outmatched opponents.
Certainly. And what is the LSU team that we're going to go say this 2014 team is? Is it the team that we saw in the first half against Wisconsin or the first 33 minutes against Wisconsin? Is it the team that we saw for much of the Mississippi State game? Or is it going to be the team that we saw late in the Wisconsin game, the last 4 minutes of the Mississippi State game, those 2 exhibition games almost, if you will? Or is it really going to be somewhere in between? I think it's going to end up being somewhere in between, but what we've seen thus far is just total extremes. And, what was interesting to me is in the post-game press conference, Les Miles did not rule out the possibility that we may see either 2 quarterbacks or just a flat-out quarterback change going forward based on what we saw in the last 4 minutes Saturday night.
Yeah, and I think that Les Miles bears a lot of the blame as well because if you can't run the ball well, why stick with it? They waited too long to try things, and once they tried things, they moved the ball and scored points. And the bottom line is, either your offensive line isn't blocking well enough for the run because you have good running backs, or teams are just jumping the run and daring you to throw the ball. And if that's the case, either way, you've got to throw the ball more often earlier in the game.
Yeah, certainly. I think it's certainly the latter of the case, because obviously they do have good backs. They do have a good offensive line. Maybe didn't play as well as they could. And do keep this in perspective, too, on late in the game. A lot of that was backups against backups. So, but it's still, a lot of those players are guys that can be out there. I mean, Malachi Dupree caught the 2 touchdown passes for LSU. He was involved early in the game, which, I pointed out Saturday night. It's that we didn't see much of him early on the first 3 weeks. All of a sudden, he was more involved in the offense in the first quarter on Saturday, and had those 2 touchdown catches in the fourth quarter, finished with 120 yards receiving.
Well, that's because he was hurt coming out of training camp and obviously wasn't ready to go. And next to Durrell, he's probably their biggest threat. Tulane, meanwhile, just continued to make mistake after mistake. 12 penalties, 4 turnovers, and pick sixes, and maybe the worst kicking game I have ever seen. And I thought they had a bad kicking game a few years back under Bob Toledo. This one's worse. And to me, that's inexcusable.
Well, you look at the kicking game, and obviously you look at 5 turnovers. That's ridiculous, and that's way too many to have any chance of winning. But you look at the kicking game, and by my calculation, that was 17 points right there. 2 bad snaps on punts were 9 points. You had a missed extra point. You had a muff punt. So many things that happened beyond the turnovers. And look, offensively, you take the turnovers away, which I know you can't do, but this was a team that moved the football pretty well. A solid running game against a Duke team that now finds itself in the top 25. That was a pretty good team that Tulane rushed for over 200 yards against, and it wasn't a garbage time situation. They did it all day long. And Lizedrick Thompson with his best game in a Tulane uniform. Dante Butler, arguably his best game in a Tulane uniform as well. But they got to clean up the turnovers and the special teams, or it's going to be a very long year uptown.
Yeah, both Tulane and LSU need to start taking a look at their quarterback position, because you just have to get better play overall. Tanner Lee's done some really good things, but way too many turnovers, which gets you beat. So we'll see how that takes place going forward. Of course, New Orleans Quarterback Club will have video here at SportsNOLA.com, SportsNOLA TV at 6 p.m. Monday night. You won't want to miss it. We'll have a lot to say there. That's on WHNO Channel 20. And, of course, high school football. We've already previewed the top games of the week coming up this weekend. And we'll have our own First NBC Bank Prep Showcase game coming up Friday night. An intriguing matchup on the North Shore.
Head right back to Covington against Slidell and St. Paul's. Figures to be a pretty good matchup as district play gets started on the North Shore. The 8-team leagues getting started this week. A couple of those in the area. Others will be, later on, a couple of weeks down the line. But I think it's good with those larger districts that you get a chance to face all of those teams, especially the one on the North Shore, down the bayou and the river. They're the ones that are getting started here this week.
And we look forward to it. Lenny, as always, a pleasure. Thanks very much for the visit, and have a great week.
All right, we'll see you later this week.
All right, that's our First NBC Bank Weekend Review, brought to you by First NBC Bank, with 32 locations throughout the greater New Orleans area and beyond. That's First NBC Bank, proud sponsor of SportsNOLA.com. For Lenny, I'm Kenny. Have a great week, and God bless you.